Emily Austen has been the architect behind some of the most significant brand moments of the past decade.
I did 5 years with Huel from when they launched. Yes, you're very well priced, you're sustainable. No one really cares about sustainability. Like, Leonardo DiCaprio is talking about the ocean and people still don't recycle. So we ain't gonna win banging that drum. Julian was very concerned with food waste, but it's like, food waste isn't sexy. People can't see it, so they don't give a shit about it. So you go through and you work out strategically, what do we think is gonna be a little bit more ownable as a topic?
Today, we're going to deconstruct some of the most successful PR campaigns of recent years and understand how modern brands really capture attention in an increasingly noisy world.
Their big win was convenience, and actually, interestingly, their original customer base was out-of-town office workers who didn't have a prep to go for lunch, and they just wanted to make something easy for lunch, and they couldn't be bothered to make a spag bowl. Was people who drove for a living, truckers, taxi drivers, school mums, people who were needed something in the car and didn't want a Ginster's pie. Is that a thing? Julian wanted to take on the sandwich, so a big win was being in the meal deal.
While others were still sending press releases and floating things down the Thames, she was pioneering new ways for brands to create cultural conversations.
I hate stunts. Do we have to talk about stunts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Stunts are essentially attention-grabbing, 24-hour news cycle moments. The lowest common denominator for stunts is there's a Chanel fashion show and then Aldi do a runway show in aisle 2.
That's quite funny.
Also floating stuff down the Thames, that's bad. For me, BrewDog has a very good relationship with their customer. I would slightly roll my eyes at their stunts. My car got burnt out and she opens the door and the Stanley Cup is still in the cup holder. It doesn't feel like you're being advertised to. It feels like a normal person has had this thing happen, which, your car exploding, well, you've got a Tesla, so you're probably used to that.
What actually makes PR versus just marketing or stunts?
Great question. I fucking hate stunts. Do we have to talk about stunts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, what are stunts to you then?
Stunts are essentially attention-grabbing, 24-hour news cycle moments, and they are often linked to something culturally. So people will, you see the lowest common denominator for stunts is there's a Chanel fashion show and then Aldi do a runway show in aisle 2, and it just becomes...
That's quite funny.
It just, but it's it's been done so many times. Yeah, you're the part of the problem.
Yeah.
Lowest common denominator.
Yeah, you shop in Aldi. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Makes you want to shop in Aldi, not Chanel.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
So I think that also floating stuff down the Thames, that's bad. That's
What are they floating down the Thames?
Oh, there's a thing in PR where every brand's just we'll float something down the Thames because it's attention grabbing. And so you always see these pop-ups, and increasingly they're now AI because, no one's got any money and everyone's trying to be progressive. So they do it with AI. But I think there's also stunts around lookalikes, or it's basically a moment in time that's designed very specifically for a kind of 24-hour news cycle. PR tends to be more of a megaphone, I would say, if you were thinking about differentiation. So it's about kind of blowing it out creatively, and from a visibility perspective, basically PR is measured in eyeballs, which is the least helpful measurement of all time. But it's about taking a concept that perhaps is advertising or marketing and actually putting it into the hands of people rather than a kind of top level strategy.
What would you say is the anatomy of a good PR campaign then?
I think a good PR campaign has to be collaborative with the other parts of the marketing ecosystem. It is usually very specifically about timing. It's about the right storytelling. It's about making sure that it's not abstract. So if there was a massive tick in the center of Trafalgar Square, everyone would understand what that brand was. A lot, if it was a random brand you've never heard of, it's too abstract. So there has to be an understanding from the business of what their customers know about the brand in order for it to land. I think also kind of cross-channel, so being relevant in the ways that your consumer downloads media, whether that is podcasting, whether that's traditional publications, online, digital competitions, etc. Anything can be amplified by a celebrity or influencers. It's just additional reach. I think also something that's shareable in WhatsApp groups, on memes, something that creates a bit more of a cultural moment where PR can be sold back into the system. It essentially gives longevity. And I think it has to make people feel something, even if that thing is that it's funny or that they want to show their mate, or they just go, fuck, that's really clever. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah.
Fuck, that's really clever. Or
We'll keep both in.
yeah, both fucks. Trifactor. We got the hat trick quite early on today.
Don't say that much.
It's called a fuck trick.
Yeah, fuck trick. Thank you. So I think it has to make people feel something. And that's why, you know, people can feel negatively as much as they feel positively about campaigns, and why people become outraged and stuff, because it does have the power to sort of stimulate a reaction.
But you don't like stunts, and you just talked about the anatomy of a campaign. But one of our former guests recently, you know, James Watt, BrewDog, like, they're incredible at it. How would you assess their kind of stunt?
Yeah, they love the sort of like 24-hour in your face.
So I guess the question is, what do you think about a well-executed stunt?
For me, BrewDog has a very good relationship with their customer. I would slightly roll my eyes at their stunts because I'm not the customer. I don't respond to that. I think there's the possibility of fatigue from too many. And I think it's also important to think about where stuff lives. Like, is it an echo chamber on LinkedIn, or is it actually living, you know, in the homes of people? BrewDog very early on set their stall out as a disruptive brand, and James is a disruptive voice. He has opinions that are political. He wants to stimulate dialogue and debate. So there's a red thread throughout that whole brand from beginning to end that really works for that customer base. I mean, whether or not it makes people go into a BrewDog space or actually buy the product anymore, I don't know, but they've certainly created a very specific brand narrative. I've worked with a lot of brands before where they say, we want to be like BrewDog, we want to be like Oatly, we want to be disruptive, but then they're not able, they don't have the team or the ideas or the bravery to actually execute that. And I think where there's often discord is where a brand doesn't have that, and then they try and do something stunty for the sake of kind of garnering public opinion, or they see BrewDog do something and they sort of think, oh, we can do that, without any of the foundational stuff that James and the team set up.
I think it also matters about your category. So, like, I've always wanted to be like that for Heights, for example, but in healthcare, the risk-reward ratios were way off. And in alcohol, it's not. Like, at the end of the day, you might as well in alcohol, because it's not like
you would just
careful.
come across as an idiot if you did it, because, not because it's you, but because of the sector. Whereas he is selling beer, so he can be a bit of a prat.
It's so risky. It's just a company ending to get it wrong in health.
Well, also, I don't need my health brand to be disruptive.
Yeah, totally.
Like, I don't need that from you. I need you to, like, make my brain better, or my skin better, or my gut better. And so I'm not seeing value as a customer in those stunts. So that's why it doesn't translate. Whereas, as you say with BrewDog, they're like, you know, disruptor, British brand. Yeah. They're gonna, you know, like, take a shit outside the Houses of Parliament, and we're gonna.
Did they do that?
Maybe, I don't know.
I am a beer drinker, and I had never once seen a BrewDog stunt.
Really?
Had you heard about them
before
though?
We were like talking about getting them on the show? I genuinely didn't have that much idea, other than the fact that he'd had like a negative experience with his staff, which was all over LinkedIn. I'd never seen the stunts.
Really?
I could only tell you about the being on a horse.
Yeah.
Or no.
Wasn't that Putin?
Yeah, that was his mocking of Putin.
Yeah. Right.
Beer at the bottom of the water. He told us about that.
Yeah.
But I'd never seen them, and also like when I think about, like, if beer companies did that, would that make me want to drink the beer more? No. I'd be like, that's weird.
Yeah, but a lot of the stuff isn't necessarily about whether they can get Chris to drink BrewDog. It's to show that they're culturally relevant, that they can make noise and stand out and get listings in supermarkets because there's, like, people aware of the brand.
Well, right. And also for a business like that, it's essentially like shelf space. Yeah. So the more visible you are, the more people who are going into, like, Sainsbury's or whatever shop it is, then, you know, that's going to drive the volume. I think also with it's interesting with James because he's obviously got a marketing brain, but he became very intertwined with that business in terms of the stunts were very closely linked to kind of his own personal feelings about stuff as well, which I think probably was part of the reason the negative experience with employees, he got such a hard time. I mean, like, obviously if people are mistreating staff, they probably should get a hard time. I don't know the intricacies of what happened, but he did get a hard time in the press for that. And I think it was because he had put himself so front and center for that business that it was very difficult to separate that culture. And the culture was stunty, disruptive, masculine.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you zoom out and you look at the broader context of the kind of media narrative about masculinity and when that becomes toxic. And that is a bit of a perfect storm for someone to be like absolutely mullered in the media.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be true. It just needs to be close enough to what looks like the truth.
And it was always, yeah, whether it's true or not, it was always going to come down on him.
Yeah.
What are the core elements that separate like a good campaign from a great campaign? Like what are the campaigns that we'll remember that were great?
I think that often businesses that where the campaign is unexpected do quite well. I think if it's a category that maybe people like clever campaigns, and the way you would identify a clever campaign is ultimately you are asking for a response from someone where they go, fuck, that's really clever. You know, competitors kind of go, yeah, they've really nailed that. I think it's about understanding the language in which consumers talk to each other. So that tone of voice is often underestimated. Specifically, the difference between good and great would be often brands use big campaigns to try and shift their consumer base. So they say, we want to appeal to a new consumer, like Bud Light is a good example of that in the US. But I think the best campaigns actually appeal to their base because they kind of double down on the narrative and the relationship that they have, rather than using that big moment as a kind of tester. You know, it remains to be seen, but in my experience and access to the data, people don't often generate millions of new customers from those campaigns. It's like, you know, they say 58% of Mercedes advertising is aimed at people who have a Mercedes, who go, yep, made the right choice. And it's like that doubling down on the base.
Which makes sense in that, you know, if you're a car manufacturer, like you're going to change a car every 4 or 5 years maybe.
Yeah.
And so there's always a choice.
Yeah.
We're literally doing it right now, you know.
Are you going to get a Jaguar?
Yeah. I actually thought the concept ended up looking quite cool.
What are you going to get?
Well, we've got a BMW. I'm going to go for a whole bunch of test drives, but still currently thinking of just upgrading to another BMW. But I'm going to try Polestar, Tesla, a few electric and a few hybrid and just see, because I haven't, you know, I haven't
You've been
tried.
out the market.
Yeah, I'm curious. And you know what? Because I'm a dad, so this is a great example of PR. I had no idea that Volvo is basically the most expensive of all of them. I didn't realise Volvo was a premium car. I just thought the Volvo was like a lame brand or
Is
whatever.
that what they've just told you, that they're a premium
It's
car?
so expensive. They're so expensive, but because I'm a dad and it's the safety thing,
Yeah.
and I'm about to have
You're
another
like,
daughter,
I can't put
and
a
so
price on the safety of my children.
genius. I mean, they're actually very nice looking cars now, but I would never thought about that as a premium brand car.
Are they all electric?
Yeah, well, but they're electric and they're hybrid, but they're more expensive than BMW or Mercedes. Who knew?
You just put it through the business, can't you?
Yeah, you can do the electric
Is
car
this
scheme.
podcast sponsored by Volvo?
No,
Yes.
and I haven't chosen them
Could
yet.
be.
Yeah, and I haven't chosen them
There's a
yet, but I
window.
was interested to find that out. You know, your price elasticity, I guess, is a lot higher when you're thinking safety.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Well, that's the metric ultimately that people care about.
And that's a good example of PR. Like Volvo have never ever tried to do anything other than say we're the safest cars.
No, because they don't need to.
Yeah.
Because they're like, we don't need to suddenly generate a whole bunch of new customers. But also, you know, that's a pretty solid, like, concern for anyone driving.
Speaking of which,
Safety.
you mentioned Jaguar. So
Yeah.
obviously the Jaguar campaign, the PR campaign, etc., was ridiculed and whatever. Lots of eyeballs. There's lots of pros and cons. But actually, to this point, Volvo brought out an ad like a week later, and that went mega viral. And it was like sort of the opposite. It was narrative. It was story led and stuff. And I did watch it, and I did cry.
Okay.
And I did share it with a bunch of my
What was it
friends in a
about?
parents
Why did you
group. It's
cry?
basically about like them having like a daughter and it may be running them over, but there's like it's like a 3-4 minute ad. So well done. It's so
Not
well
into
done.
it.
It's cinematic. It was done by like the cinematographer from Interstellar. So it's like
They run
really.
over their kid.
No, but they don't run
Did
over
they
the kid.
like
That's the whole
reverse
point.
over
Have
the
you
kid?
seen this?
No, I didn't see it, but I feel like you're like
You sure it
not
was an
going to be
advert?
moved.
Yeah, I watched a snuff film.
Wait, hang on. Sorry. So you saw the Jaguar stuff. You then saw a video on Volvo about someone running over their kid
Yeah.
about
Then you
safety,
cried.
and you were like, "I have a kid and I reverse,
This
so
is-
that could be me." And
This
then
is
you
the
cried.
narrative. This is
But-
the narrative.
And
No,
then
no. So in the obviously in the advert, they don't run over this kid. They stop just in front, and it's like this whole amazing thing, and it's very powerful and it's very moving. And they're basically doing like a whole film's worth of narrative in 3 or 4 minutes. It's very masterfully done.
Okay.
I shared it with a bunch of
auto stop or something.
yeah, basically.
So it's like
all the cars
cinematically
do
beautiful.
No, but this is the whole thing. The whole thing is like Volvo's brand is about safety, right?
I'm just saying, you know, I my car, if I'm driving towards a car in front of me, will stop.
Tesla,
Yeah.
sponsored by
It
Tesla.
will auto stop.
Of course, you've got a Tesla.
Yeah, I know.
You know, that hurts my soul hearing that. But
No, but you are like,
What have you got?
I don't want to say.
Oh no,
you've got a flash car.
got to say now.
I've got a Range Rover.
Oh, do you enjoy getting that stolen?
Yeah,
I'd love a Range
had
Rover.
2 stolen.
Yeah, I'd like a Range Rover.
You've
You
got
can't-
Keep
another one.
coming back for more.
You know,
I'm
you
like,
can't-
oh,
speaking
make my
about-
insurance more expensive.
Speaking about bad PR, you can't get a Range Rover insured in London anymore.
No, well, yeah, it's like 20 grand a year.
How absurd is that?
Why do you
absurd.
keep buying them?
I'm a glutton for
Punishment.
wasting money. No, I actually don't have it registered to London.
Yeah.
So,
How nuts is that? You can't buy one now, like new, because of how many of them get stolen.
yeah, it's wild.
That's terrible
It's been
PR.
broken into twice and it's been stolen twice.
Yeah, it's not even PR. It's true, but it's like that is really people know that now, and anyone who has a Range Rover is like, don't get one; it will just get stolen.
Unless that person sees it as a status that it's so desirable that they would continue to purchase it, which isn't me.
Sounds like it is. You just
I
said
would
it
rather-
was. in
Actually
your words, you said it
self-described.
was you. So
Yeah, it is me.
managing international money used to drive me crazy until I found Wise Business, the account for doing business in other currencies. I can hold money in different currencies and only convert when the rates are good. No more rushing to exchange at bad rates or losing money on outrageous fees. And my team handles all the payments themselves. I don't have to micromanage anything. They have their own logins, set their own limits, and I just keep an eye on things from my phone. One simple account lets you pay and get paid in over 40 currencies. There's no hidden fees, no marked up exchange rates, and it connects right to your accounting software. Whether you're paying vendors or suppliers in Europe or you're getting paid from Australia, it's all just easy. And that's what I love about Wise. It just takes this complicated thing and it makes it really simple. Your money's always secure with 24/7 protection, and you can see exactly where everything is in real time. To learn more about how you can use Wise Business to save time, money, and stress, visit wise.com/business.
Talking of cars, did you see the Stanley brand turn that Stanley Cup in the burning car
Yeah.
into an ad, and it got 84 million views?
For those
Yeah.
that don't know, what is that?
So Stanley Cup had a lot of, they obviously exploded on social media in the last kind of 24 months. And they were always seen as a durable, practical brand. And then they like made pastel colors and the whole of Gen Z like shat their pants and started buying them. And that was like their pivot. And they got a lot of bad press about like leaking and questions about the kind of durability of the product. So they wanted to create a campaign that essentially was like, no, it's the best product. There was a woman who her car set on fire. She wasn't in the vehicle, no one got hurt. And the only remaining thing in the car was her Stanley Cup, and the ice that was in the Stanley Cup was still frozen. So that was the campaign.
So was it
And
fake?
it has not been widely proven that it was fake. I think it probably was fake. There was also a lot of additional spend behind the scenes to promote that video so that it, any virality that it might have had then got boosted, which is, fine. Brands do that. Interestingly, when the wildfires happened in LA this year, there was a video of someone who picked their Stanley Cup out of the wreckage. And it made me wince a bit because the idea of a brand taking advantage of that, it felt really uncomfortable. And that sort of disappeared from social media very quickly. So I think, both had the capacity to be viral moments and kind of communicate a subliminal message about the product being durable. But I think the wildfire moment culturally really wasn't the right thing. So brands will try a lot of different things, and then often the one you see is one of many that they've tried.
What do you think actually goes into making a campaign like that go viral? So let's just take our tinfoil hat skepticism energy with us and assume that it
Fucking
wasn't
crazy.
assume that it wasn't real and was all manufactured.
But it probably
So what,
happened, and then they were like, "Oh, let's."
well, maybe, but what goes into it?
There's lots of stuff around like ownership of the video. So what a brand will probably do is buy that content pretty early on so that they have full ownership of it. They will promote it through an initial account, but potentially incentivize people to share it. That campaign lived very much in the early stages on social media, and it was TikTok. So they will probably proactively send it to a lot of people as well, a lot of their influencers, a lot of people in their community that can repost it to make it seem organically like it's gaining traction. It's pretty low lift for an influencer to just like, repost something.
And they're just posting the story as opposed to necessarily the ad.
The original video is a woman being like, my car got burnt out, and she opens the door and the Stanley Cup is still in the cup holder, and then she's like basically narrating to her followers like, oh look, and here it is type thing. So it doesn't feel like you're being advertised to.
Yeah.
It feels like a normal person has had this thing happen, which your car exploding, well, you've got a Tesla, so you're probably used to that, but the car exploding isn't necessarily a common thing, but it's not like so wild. Like it's happened to people. So the setting itself isn't like too hard for people to imagine. Plus you've got this product that people, that has carried a lot of favor with people that's instantly recognizable. So it's essentially a piece of viral content that they're pushing, but they're then retroactively applying a lot of the marketing architecture to make it kind of live outside of just that moment. They'll also be doing a lot of sampling. They'll be looking on Pinterest and other platforms about, I think the color of it might have got damaged in the fire, but I think the color was like a kind of brown, bronzy color. So then they will start labeling certain images, pushing spend behind product images so people kind of start seeing it more. And then they sell it back into the system. So then it's like Daily Mail Online, this viral video shows how amazing Stanley Cups are, so then it kind of goes back into the funnel, and then you get another time. Then you get your commentators on it. So people on TikTok being like, have you guys seen this video with the green screen? It's gone, it's had 10 million, 20, 100 million views. What do you think? And then it becomes a debate. And then it's like, you're just really getting a lot of juice for the squeeze.
And so in that example, as a professional, you think that thing happened, and they were like, and they weren't involved in creating it. So that event took place, and they were like, okay, this is really special, and we're going to put this big plan together of all that stuff you've just said, which, I mean, I worked in marketing for a long time, and I hadn't actually thought about some of that.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, as the like how you make the long tail of it keep bumbling along. So that was an organic event that happened. They then bought it, and then they ran with it.
I think probably it happened and then they took it quickly. But I think there are examples where those things are manufactured.
Yeah. So if that is how to make the best of a moment that happens, and as a brand you can sort of pick up this piece of luck essentially and turn it into an opportunity, then what about when you are planning the whole thing in advance? So a really good example, this enormous marketing engine, but Barbie, right? That film went massively global, endless PR moments, all of it planned, obviously.
Yeah.
So take us through that lens, like really structurally creating a PR giant.
There's just something to caveat early on is a lot of this stuff depends on the size of the brand already. So like I said earlier with the Nike tick or whatever, it's like everyone has heard of Barbie, everyone knows what it is. So you're not really having to do any education. So it is literally all amplification, and that makes it a lot easier. Whereas if you're a small brand, I think this is a mistake, a lot of which maybe we can talk about separately, but a mistake a lot of brands make is that they take lessons from big brands without really considering, well, yeah, but they already have 1 million people on a mailing list, or, like presence in stores, or, a founder that's really famous and has 1 million followers or whatever. So I think with Barbie, there was already an established understanding. The second thing is, it is a topical, divisive topic. It's about the way women look. It's about, there was a lot of stuff in there that was like about feminism and friendship, and, there was a lot of criticism about, you have Margot Robbie who's like whinging about not being perfect or pretty enough, and she's like the most attractive person on the planet. And so it stimulates conversation that is cultural, social, political, etc. So you've already got some pretty solid bedrock there. In terms of the actual campaign, I think most often with those types of campaigns where they see success is that they're very capable of working out what they want the end result to look like. So for them, it's like, we want to make $1 billion in the box office. And so ultimately, like, we are then just working back from that. The sequencing is really important. When are we doing things? So there's obviously a promotional schedule with the film, which is, they must have started like 8 months before it came out, I think, where they actually have, whether it's film, like Venice or whatever, like actual kind of film industry events, but also seeing a lot of the cast together. That's kind of what Wicked did with Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. Like, they were at the Olympics together, they're at the French Open, they're like communicating to people very clearly that they are sort of part of this package. The access to the talent was a big thing for Barbie. So Margot Robbie et al. Did loads and loads and loads of interviews. Her wardrobe was amazing. She was sort of dressed in clothing that was inspired by the looks in Barbie. You then load in like Dua Lipa doing a hit song, and it's like the Christmas ad thing, like, get someone famous who's going to have a number one. That then creates a whole thing over here. So now you're not just in film world, you're in music and you're in fashion and you're here and you're here. Then, I think probably the biggest thing that they did was the franchising, was the licensing deals, where they had Airbnb creating Barbie's dream house and you could go and stay, or they had fashion brands creating a capsule collection, or they had like, I think Stanley Cup did Wicked, not Barbie, but you could buy a fucking green Stanley Cup. And it's like, people want merch, people want to buy into it, people want to be part of this movement. And if you're overlaying on top of that this idea that it's about this difficulty that everyone faces of navigating womanhood in the 21st century, people want to be part of that topic. So I think it was seamlessly executed. I think the sequencing was perfect. They had a massive lead into it. And they were really good at storytelling. They had the woman who created Barbie was in the film briefly and then kind of talking about it. It's like, the cynic in me is like, that was just a massive advert for Mattel. Like, does anyone think that wasn't just Barbie being like, shit, we're not as relevant? We did like a Barbie in a wheelchair, it didn't really work. We tried to diversify Barbie, but ultimately it's like a very specific body type with proportions that maybe like aren't as relevant now in the kind of woke 21st century. So we need to do a repositioning that demonstrates that we really understand the evolution of how women are perceived and how they look and how they feel about themselves. So to me, it was just like one massive advert, but people really connected with it.
What about the Barbie Oppenheimer thing?
Barbenheimer.
Barbenheimer.
Because I don't think I saw, again, like maybe I'm just living under a rock, I don't think I saw that much about Barbie other than its crossover with Oppenheimer.
But did you see the products, and did you see Margot Robbie? Like, did you
saw Margot Robbie? Yeah.
Yeah. And when you saw her, did you think of Barbie, or were you just like, she's fit?
No, definitely thought she was fit. But
yeah, of course. She is fit. Like, it's kind of a statement.
But did I know it was Barbie? Like, yes, because she was distinctly dressed in a very like almost toy-like way, which is obviously what they were doing. So yeah, I did. But then the crossover of the films doing so incredibly well, like that couldn't have been planned.
Oh, it would definitely be planned.
Really?
That's like me at Barbie ringing my mate Oppenheimer and being like, should we get the tail of this film and create...
Apparently that stuff is quite planned, because this is similar.
Well, that's fucking genius.
Yeah, it's a similar kind of thing to it's that Effect. I can't remember what it's called, but yeah, you're launching 2 blockbusters at the same time, drives more people in general to both.
Yeah.
Than just launching one at one time. So that like the studios try to do this, try to make them different, try to make them massive, and try to do them at the same time.
Also, what was really clever about that was that you know, in my opinion, with absolutely no data or statistics to back it up. Barbie was like, I'm going to make my boyfriend come to this film. And Oppenheimer was like, I'm going to make my girlfriend come to this. So people went to see both because it was like, you know, Oppenheimer was, you know, serious and technical and about science. Historic, and like, oh my God, girls, how would they ever fucking get into that? And Barbie was like fashion and whatever, and Dua Lipa. But it was like this trade-off that was slightly different audiences that were connected. So people went to see both. And I think that it would have been planned. But it's the same. It's like when fucking McDonald's hack Burger King's Twitter. It's like, if you think that's not planned, you're deluded.
Just trying to think how many of these things exist in the world.
I think you'd be surprised. It's kind of like when I remember really early in my career watching David Beckham on Graham Norton. Huge Saturday night for me. I remember talking to a friend who was a publicist, and I was like, God, it's so effortless, and and she was like, he has a stylist, he has a vocal coach, he has a media trainer, he's seen the questions and gone through them. It's so engineered, and part of the skill of that is that you don't really realize it's happening. But it's not just like, wow, this charismatic guy.
The first moment in my life I ever learned this was if you do a TED Talk, you have to basically learn your whole script, and you get coaching for it and stuff, and they're all trained. The coaches are trained on like how to do this for TED.
Right.
And the process is you learn every single word of your script so meticulously that you are then a robot by the time you're actually delivering it. There is no emotion or anything because you really know the thing like inside out. You've done it 100, 200 times.
Yeah.
So then the final stage of it is doing it all again, but acting. The fumbling, the mumbling, the mistakes, the things, everything is manufactured.
Yeah.
Be human. And so you're even acting to be human, but like you could do that same TED Talk identically 5 or 6 different times in a row, and it would come out exactly the same. There's no real fumbling or mumbling in any of it.
That's also the kind of skill of media training.
Totally.
And that's where if there's an individual who's the face of a brand, it is very specifically engineered.
Like, so think about, I hosted Sahil at this event last night to promote his book live, and we had obviously done a podcast with him, and he is absolutely brilliant at delivering word for word the exact same thing perfectly.
Yeah, it's like rinse and repeat.
Honestly, and so during the live event,
and not a single word more.
Yeah, and then like just exactly like clip end, and so I knew when the clip end was coming because I'd interviewed him before, and so I was like, oh, I've got like 5 minutes to chill in my own head, and then I was like, now I need to refocus because he's about to end.
But how does that make you feel? Do you feel like he's less authentic because it's a marketing thing, or do you feel like he's just really well practiced and he's rolling it out and it's clever?
Well, I mean, we interview a lot of authors, and so they're all the same.
Welcome.
Yeah.
I mean, you are definitely coming across as more authentic than ordinary because...
Yeah, but we're not asking questions about her book. So here's the thing.
Yeah, wait till I switch into that.
Yeah, if we asked you loads of questions about Smarter, you would do the same thing that everyone else does. You would, because you already know from feedback, from your coaching, from being on other podcasts, from all of the things, you know the stories and sentences that land best to sell the books. Although and people all do the same thing.
I probably wouldn't, although I'm definitely not like... it's probably not as like polished and specific as an author. But also I think, I interact with, like, we work together and I have normal conversations with intelligent, interesting people who are trying to figure out what to do. And I never feel like it's us and them, and I say that to my team all the time. It's like, it is collaborative, and I think people want to be spoken to like a normal person and have a normal interaction.
Do agree, but at an event where people are paid a lot of money to hear you say very inspirational things, even if it's the exact same words in the book, you kind of still expect it and want it.
Yeah, and it's the best delivery of that idea.
Correct.
Often, if he had tried to riff it and not follow what was in the book, it wouldn't have been as powerful for everyone in there. It just so happens that I know him really well, speak to him all the time, have interviewed him twice recently. And so for me, it was
boring.
Well, I don't
Sick of
boring,
it.
But
he's number 2 on the New York Times bestseller list, isn't he?
Correct.
As of a week ago?
Yeah, yesterday.
As of like 2 days ago.
That is seriously impressive.
I mean, his media tour has been absolutely insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 3 months straight.
Who did that? Is that a publisher, or does he have his own?
No, he was with
HarperCollins.
HarperCollins, yeah.
And they've just gone, we're going to go balls to the walls.
Yeah.
Well, it was a big book deal. And so I think at the very beginning, they were all aligned on this is going to be like huge. And he himself has a huge audience.
Yeah.
And has a massive newsletter.
He's got nearly 1 million Insta follow. Yeah.
Twitter.
But he's got nearly 1 million newsletter subscribers,
That's
which is crazy.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he's like really is the only person I know that has done that and built that quite organically. Security compliance is one of those things that can silently derail your business. Not because it's impossible, but because most of us put it off until it becomes urgent. And by then, it's often too late. I want to tell you about Vanta because it fundamentally changed how our company handles compliance. They've built a system that automates preparing for SOC 2 and ISO 27001 certification, turning what used to be months of tedious work into a straightforward process. What makes Vanta different is that they understand this isn't just about checking boxes. It's about building trust with your customers while protecting your business. That's why over 8,000 companies, from two-person startups to major enterprises, rely on their platform. If you're growing your business and you know security compliance is something you need to address, visit vanta.com/secret leaders. They're offering $1,000 off your first year, and honestly, it's worth every penny just for the peace of mind. It's the solution you wish you'd found years ago. Use Vanta so you don't get slowed down by security paperwork and focus on what matters, growing your business. Visit vanta.com/secret leaders now and get $1,000 off your first year. But presumably, and we're talking about campaigns, presumably all of the campaigns, everyone is trying to do that. Everyone is trying to make these crazy successful films and brands and all the rest of it. So why does something do so well? Like, what's the secret sauce that Barbie had, or the other brands that you know that we would have heard of? How do they cut through when others just completely fail?
The failures we've seen more recently have been campaigns that have been quite heavily marred with drama that's not relevant for the film. So the Blake Lively stuff is probably the most contemporary example with her film. It's wild.
Everyone's
But
talking about it
none
all
of
the
that's
time.
planned.
Yeah, what is that? I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
what's your take on it?
So, okay, well, just quickly to go back to that, I think with Barbie, it's a beloved brand. If you didn't own one, your sibling or your friend or whatever owned one. So there's already an emotional connection to that. It's amplified by the fact that you've got these mega superstars with a huge reach. Everyone wants to feature them. They're doing really elevated press. You know, you're not trying to pitch Margot Robbie for the cover of Vogue in 10 different territories. You're just figuring out it's a very different type of publicity to being like, I've got this up and comer, can you feature them? To being like, when do you want to shoot Margot Robbie for this? So there's the star power thing is important. You've then got these, you know, viral songs, really relevant musicians at the time. The movement for Ken was also, I think, quite interesting. I think that probably was something that happened more organically that they then jumped on. And then he's like performing the song and a music set. So they're crossing over into other territories. Ultimately, people go to the cinema because they want to be transported. They want to, you know, possibly learn stuff like with Oppenheimer or whatever, but they're going, I don't fucking know. And they're, but they want to relax, and it's potentially a night out with a friend or a date or whatever. So it's kind of, it's evoking a very specific feeling. And people don't like the drama attached to it because it's sort of, it changes your perception of the enjoyment of that moment. And it is like you're suspending a fourth wall into being like, I know this isn't real, but I'm up for being transported into it. So I think the reason most these big campaigns do well, I mean, the thing we haven't mentioned is like they got a fuck ton of cash, and that is an important point, is they are spending a lot of money on this globally to make it live and breathe.
It's like tens of millions in spend to try and hit $1 billion plus in box
more.
office.
Yeah, all these deals with, you know, if you look at Airbnb and you go, well, if we create the dream Barbie houses and we let people stay there, you know, they've then got a mailing list and a this and a that. And so you're tapping into these other resources, and you are migrating it from being an experience in a cinema to a cultural moment. People, I think that one of the big things was America Ferrera's speech about women are expected to be X, Y, and Z. And that really resonated with people, and it became, you know, she then kind of had a moment to break out. She was very likable. She played Ugly Betty. There was this like, people have sort of watched her on her career succeed and be an advocate for women. And, you know, Margot Robbie's like the ultimate girl next door, ultimate fit girl next door, but she's also really successful. She's got her own production company. Her husband was involved in the movie. There's just a lot of like feel good storytelling around that. And you'll notice she announced a pregnancy shortly after the film came out because she was probably like, I'll take a year out and go and do that. But there was no distraction. There was no drama. There was nothing. She didn't promote anything other than that film. There was very specific purity of message for the whole of that time. The difference with the Blake Lively saga, I mean, do you want to talk about that?
If we're talking about it from like a PR concept, I'm fascinated. Like, that is everywhere on social media.
Feels
right
like
now.
a cultural moment,
Yeah.
but one that I don't care about.
Feels like an Amber Heard, Johnny Depp.
Yeah, it's like a huge war going on, and people are like, what are these people like behind closed doors? There's all the PR interaction.
And presumably people are so interested because also not just because Blake Lively's interesting, but because Ryan Reynolds is so broadly loved.
Yeah.
That what does that mean about him? And he hasn't really got that involved in it that I can see. But I don't know.
I think he's involved now. I mean,
I don't know. So yeah,
The argument has swung so heavily both ways as well. Like, when it first came out, everyone was like, Justin's awful. And then now, like, he's published his stuff and it's like, no, Blake's awful. And so that can't
who's
be
awful,
planned.
Emily? Which one of them?
So I think they're all fucking awful.
Right.
Is the sort of professional. I know more about this because I know the publicists on both sides.
Okay.
So I will just say that. The general consensus at a zoomed out level is there are truths in both of what they're saying, and this should never have been played out on a public stage. So it's like it has now, everyone's lost control of it, and it's kind of disappeared into something that's now very, very hard to
And it's basically just negatively impacted both of them. And the film? Or was it done well for the film?
I mean, the film, I think, did reasonably well, but I think that it will have marred for everyone, and like legal fees and issues and dramas. It's absolutely not what you want. The reason, so just to go back, I think when Blake Lively first came out with the initial information, which was, I am suing this guy who was a director and a co-star for, I mean, broadly sexual harassment, but there were lots of things in there that were, you know, about her weight and about all these other topics, which are quite difficult. They're quite flammable. They're quite difficult to talk about. As you say, the general consensus was like, fuck him, how dare he? And I think then what people did was go, hang on, we've actually blindly followed her. And maybe this is part of this conversation in the US about like what's woke and how we take stuff at face value. So you've got these like hot button topics. But I mean, you know, without like talking about US politics, part of the reason Trump is president is because Americans are sick of woke America. That's what they're saying. And so these conversations around gender and you know, the assumption of like that someone's guilty make people feel really uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people piled in and were like, well, obviously Blake's correct. And then obviously when Justin started to talk about, you know, some evidence or his side of it, people were then like, oh shit, maybe I reacted too soon. And then they have projected that onto Blake Lively as like, how dare you mislead us? So then she sort of lost that popular vote. She's also best friends with Taylor Swift, and people have very strong feelings about Taylor Swift, you know, both that she's successful and also people kind of don't think she's a representative of the sisterhood. You know, she's a cultural phenomenon, so she's divisive. I think people feel like they were misled and they rushed in too soon. So now they're kind of backtracking. He has a much smaller platform than her, a lot, you know, less powerful friends, etc. So he is trying to communicate in the way that he knows how, which is setting up a website and kind of, and then I think he's currying favor because people are like, well, good for you for taking her on. I think it's just like no one wins in these situations, and we're all getting, as the public, very specifically curated parts of the information. But it's a bit like the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case. It's like, it's a perfect storm of like chaos and accusations and like gender stuff, or in their case like sex and drugs. And then you've got the fact that the Blake Lively film is all about you know, a topic that makes this whole thing feel a little bit dirtier, and that doesn't sit well with people, and he's obviously now countersued them for $400 million. And I personally think the media narrative is skewing heavily in his favor at the
Really?
moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's very much like Ryan Reynolds is a tyrant.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything you need to be true is not true.
Why? What? So I mean,
Ryan Reynolds is now being, like almost coming front and
Dragged.
center as like the architect behind all of it, and whatever.
Controlling
And he had, I would say, before this, he had one of the best personal brands.
Yes.
Reputations there was.
And
probably the best
show-
personal brand in the world, maybe.
Yeah,
would
and
say,
his
yeah.
show
Yeah.
about Wrexham, and he
Yeah.
made very clever investments, been
Yeah.
really successful. He
Deadpool
was like,
killed it.
yeah, he was like the guy's guy, girls
Yeah.
fancy. I mean,
Yeah.
perfect.
I've been seeing that Reynolds has obviously done lots of ads with companies, and normally the comments are so positive about
Yeah.
him. And for the first time ever, the ads are like, fuck him,
Yeah.
fuck
Really?
him. To the point where
Yeah.
advertisers are turning off the comment sections because it's gone so negative.
Yeah.
No way.
And it's like your poisonous wife, and
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
you guys are the masterminds. I think there's also just it's very precarious, the kind of Hollywood thing, because we've been shown tangibly time and time again that people that. I mean, I don't think anyone thought like Weinstein was a great bloke, but there are lots of examples where people thought people were different, and then it's come out that there's like something abhorrent. And so I think people are quite ready to be like, oh, maybe this is bullshit. And it's impossible to like know the facts without being kind of in the room, but I think they're not in touch with reality. And so I think this is really, really bad for them. I don't think she will recover anytime soon.
So now she has a lot of haters, does she?
I think
Oh yeah.
there's a lot of haters. I think there's also all the press are looking for follow-up stories. So it's like every year Blake Lively's been in Taylor Swift's box at the NFL. She wasn't there this year, which is the advice I would have given her if I were her publicist, is like, don't go, like lay low, don't get, no more pictures of you, like just don't give them anything.
Yeah.
But it's a story. She wasn't there. Is Taylor Swift distancing herself?
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, at what point, if you get the Swifties turning on you, I mean, that's problematic.
Thank you for that. That is another good example of like PR getting out of your control and maybe, like you said, being manufactured and maybe not, and then it just completely blowing out of proportion and you lose the thread of it and everyone's a loser. What about PR that is like deliberately trying to understand the difference between brand building and awareness versus making sales? For example, like how did Addison Lee just beat Uber with a tweet?
I would preface this with like, everyone hates Uber. Everyone secretly hates Uber, but they don't really have another good option. So we're using it because we care more about convenience than we do about like our own, like political stance. There's a lot of love, particularly in London, for black cabbies and the nostalgia of that. And Addison Lee decided at the point at which Uber allegedly lost they did lose their license, but it was like, you've lost your license, but we'll extend the time in which we take it away for 9 months, within which time you can just like appoint some more government people on your board and pay TFL, and like you'll probably be fine. So Addison Lee tweeted minutes after the announcement was made at Uber, "You okay, hun?" And it went viral, and it obviously made a lot of people smile or laugh, but it was also quite unexpected from a business like that. There was a perception that it was much more corporate. There wasn't like a person or a dialogue. I think that they definitely have leaned into the safety piece. Addison Lee has done a lot more around safety, and you've got kids, kid.
Another one on the way.
And do you say you've got children if you've got one coming?
That's a good question. No, I mean, currently I say I have a daughter.
Fine. Yeah. Okay. So as a dad of daughters, you want your children to be safe if they were to get in a mini cab or a black cab or anything.
Yeah. Ideally a Volvo.
Ideally a Volvo Uber is what we're all hoping for you. But the safety piece is paramount, and that's where Uber's lost a lot, because you see these stories of people doing things that are awful. And so Addison Lee,
women in general, right, are like properly on this, this wouldn't take a risk.
It's interesting though, because if you got into an illegal minicab back in the day, that feels really risky, but you don't apply the same risk to Uber, because in your head you're like, it's on a phone, it's tracked, I can see the number plate, you could share your journey with someone. So the structure around it feels safer. So I think then when it's not safe, people feel almost like more offended by it or more aggrieved by it or shocked by it because they thought those provisions were in place. Addison Lee is a very different proposition to Uber. I think it's Rory Sutherland talks about this with Uber. It's really interesting because they can't reduce the time you have to wait for an Uber. Their entire campaign is about the visibility. Psychologically, if I can see the car's 9 minutes away, it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 9 or 18, it's the knowledge that I can plan those minutes that makes the experience better. It's not that I need a taxi within 2 minutes. So it's a very clever understanding of what the problem that you're trying to solve for customers is. Addison Lee is slightly more expensive. The booking platform's different, but they have doubled down on that trust piece, like you said, with Volvo and safety. It's like that is the message. And I think because their personal narrative with Uber is unexpected, it lands more compellingly.
Yeah, unexpected versus exactly as you expect.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also they are speaking like for the people. That's what people think and it's almost like laughable. They're kind of trivializing something that a lot of people think. And so they've been really clever in positioning themselves against Uber. I would also say that Uber has done zero brand building. Like,
just functional.
I have never seen anything other than crisis comms from them. I have never seen conversations from interesting people in the cars. I've never seen any sort of International Women's Day, female drivers, safety. Like, I think it's really interesting to think about, could you pick a female driver if you wanted one? I mean, it's not to say that like female drivers will never assault you, but like some people feel more comfortable in that environment. They've never done anything that even begins to address the accusations or allegations or real situations around some of this stuff. So it is all like firefighting with them. So the brand building it's a functional brand where you get an Uber because you can't get anything else. And so, you know, they haven't really created a sense deeper than that, I don't think.
Would the competitor brands be elevating the negative about Uber?
It has been known to be part of a strategy to find stories of people that have tried to be silenced or drivers that have been arrested or whatever, or had their licenses revoked or, you know, variations on that, and placed those stories.
Yeah. You mentioned Trump earlier, and I think the thing he was very, very good at was finding the negative that was funny about a competitor and just bringing it to the forefront in a really simple message. And so Uber being unsafe just permeates now.
Yeah.
And so they must be elevating that somehow.
Psychologically, it's a volume thing. If you see the same story enough times, and if it becomes kind of colloquialized in the language that we use when we talk to each other, you see it really positively. Like brands will refer to like Huel or Sellotape, or they'll mention brand names to kind of relate to a category as a whole, or I'll get a Dyson, or, you know, they sort of take the brand name. But that relationship with the word can also exist the other way. And I do think that I personally think that if there was a better alternative to Uber, many people would switch. It's just that they have, you know, in our hierarchy or our prioritization, we would happily forego those other things for the sake of convenience.
Yeah,
and
there's
that's
good
what
press,
they do.
bad press, but there's just also the
I'm in a
easiest
rush.
product. Yeah, simplicity wins.
So I suppose advice to founders to, you know, we are a business show at the end of the day.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. When we think about startups doing PR, when we think about like how do you make, you know, non-noteworthy products PRable?
So we're now talking about your products. Sorry, that was so mean.
So it was good.
Keep that in.
We were non-noteworthy for years, and then we started working with Emerge.
Your product
No,
your product cured my psoriasis. I
Really?
could be a medical case study.
Good recovery.
Thank you. Wow.
But your product is it's
Gave us a compliment in a space that we don't promote.
but like your
No, like skin, gut. It's all.
yeah.
it's PRable, you know, like I think the timing you had your brand PRable, the product itself PRable, the way you've put it together. So I'm kind of not talking about a Heights type brand, because I think Heights is kind of brilliant. But like, how do you bring PR to normal brands?
Can I also just say one other thing about Dan? Is you are one of
Is this a sponsored ad?
This is one of the... Dan is one of the only people...
Like Volvo.
I have... What colour Volvo would you get?
I think like silver or black. I
Okay.
don't know.
Okay, so classic.
Yeah.
Dan is one of the only founders I've met in 15 years who will only do press about himself if it directly elevates the brand. And I think that does lead me into a point about, you know, to like stumble towards answering your question. Understanding what's at your disposal as a business and being able to separate yourself as the founder or your ego, because I do see a lot of founders who double down on, like, particularly if their brands are struggling, the first thing they do is say, we need a piece with me in the FT or in, you know, and I always think, is that actually helping, or is it like, I will feel better about my own position in this business if I can put that on LinkedIn and people will tell me that it's good. And I talk about it in my book, that we often, particularly digitally, reward perceived success in the same way we reward actual success. So if someone's in the FT, like, who the fuck knows whether they're making any money or their brand's going well or if it's a last ditch attempt. Like, I worked with a brand that raised 50 million quid and we did a cover of the FT and they went bust 2 weeks later. So it's like, it's, you know, it's very much like perception. In terms of making ordinary products extraordinary, I think that a lot of brands collaborate too quickly. So I think I see brands like a deodorant brand being like, oh, we're going to do an April Fool's with a cheese brand, or we're going to do this, or, and it's like, it's very confusing for a customer if the biggest thing you ever do is not your core product. It's like, what are you actually communicating? And I think that repetition is important. It's much more impactful to see the same product 200 times than see 200 different products once. And I think people get bored and they get impacted by seeing James Watt at BrewDog do something spicy on his LinkedIn, or, you know, a stunt that's well executed. I think it's also about thinking about PR within a broader marketing funnel. So for me, the easiest way to think about it is PR is the megaphone, but it's like, what are you saying? Like, what are you amplifying, and who are you talking to, and where are you talking, and for how long, and in what forum? And I think I see it all the time with startups particularly, is that, and I wonder if it's like confidence in the product or lack of confidence in the product, where it's like, we want to collaborate with this other brand, or we want to do something funny, or an April Fool's, or a stunt, or a moment in time. And, you know, maybe it doesn't cost loads of money, but it's quite time. It you know, it takes up a lot of time. And it's like, what are we really doing this for? And often we get brands that make these stunts in a vacuum and then come to us and we're like, it's not press-worthy. I mean, maybe it's a social moment, but it's quite unusual for something to just like happen and go viral. And it's quite unusual. I think people end up then just pulling on really basic levers. Like, my worst thing ever, other than Float It Down the Thames, is like the lookalike.
Oh, yeah.
Which I've done, and I'm embarrassed, but...
Can you tell us what the lookalike is?
Basically where brands get someone who looks like a famous person.
There's like this, and Ed Sheeran
pretend.
is a good example.
Yeah, or like I actually think Surreal did it quite cleverly, where they hired people who had like who were called Dwayne Johnson or whatever to be in their campaign.
That was well done.
It was well done, but it's like it lived on social. Yeah. Like, no, the Telegraph's not writing about it. I mean, people reading the Telegraph probably aren't buying cereal. They're probably on social media, so maybe that kind of works. We did it with Grind Coffee. When I say I'm embarrassed by it, I mean, sorry, David, I'm embarrassed by it in the sense that I think it's not necessarily like the hardest my brain has ever worked to come up with a PR idea, but we took over, Grind took the old Nespresso store in King's Cross, and we wanted to do something to talk about the fact that Nespresso had moved out, Grind had moved in, and so we hired a George Clooney. The original idea was we were going to do a George Clooney lookalike competition. So we were going to have a line of George Clooney's, you know, some like were a bit spurious, some really good, with their CVs, and they were applying to be the new face of this Grind store.
It's quite good.
I think that's excellent.
But then what happens is budgets get cut, and there's like budget for one George Clooney. So then you're like, yeah, it doesn't work in the same way, but sure. And then it ended up being a kind of lookalike, and the store is it's in a very useful place in the station. So people come down the escalator and look to the left, and there's someone who looks like George Clooney. I'll show you a picture afterwards. He does look like George Clooney, but it was...
Can we get that on the screen?
It was, yeah, I'll get it for you. It was tonally, it was quite clever, because it was like, grind is the, you know, in the David Goliath kind of thing with Nespresso. They have the capacity to be a bit more tongue-in-cheek. George Clooney is a kind of very well-known... So it kind of works, but it's like... It's not necessarily like winning a PR award, but it's an easy way of like creating a little bit of noise and fun.
I think you're being harsh on yourself. I think that's quite funny and quite tasteful.
Yeah, excellent.
Maybe I'm just
If
cynical.
I were to see that, I'd be like,
100%.
Yeah, but you know, are people buying more coffee because of it?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And
Maybe.
actually,
Well, I mean, I think it's just like
I love that I'm promoting your idea and
I'm
you're
slagging
arguing
it off.
against it.
Yeah, I'm like, no.
This
I
is
think-
genius from
I
you.
think,
Yeah.
but I think that's a really important question, because, okay, on a practical level, we work together. You do the PR at Heights,
Yeah.
and I'm quite involved in it,
Yeah.
and we talk quite a lot about stuff. And I imagine I'm one of the more challenging people that you work with, because I say that often to a lot of your ideas, which is like, yeah, but it is a great idea and it's creative and it's fun, but like, what's it really going to do? And that is a really hard thing to work out with PR a lot of the time. And so actually, a lot of the time, the stuff that really works, back to your previous point, is repeating the same message over and over again. Having tried PR for the best part of a decade and finding it incredibly frustrating and not liking it, when I started working with Emerge, in a two-way relationship that worked well, I came to you guys with a very specific and simple brief that I said, don't do anything other than this one thing. And you guys were like, that's actually really helpful, because you're not saying, make us famous about everything.
Yeah.
We just launched our probiotic, and we had all the science studies to prove that it was better than all the other ones. And I was like, but it's hard work getting people to believe that.
Yeah.
Just do this one thing. Don't talk about the other products. You don't need to talk about the brand. You don't need to tell people about celebrity. You need to do any of those things. Just get science journalists focused on this fact for like a period of time. And that, between both of us, as in between Heights and Emerge, that was an awesome strategy. It was a bit boring.
Yeah.
Probably not much fun for you guys, but it was really consistent work.
Depends on
Don't
the
want to
money.
speak for the team.
But
Everyone's got a
a
price.
really consistent and clear message where I knew that we could win,
Yeah.
because we had the evidence to prove that that was true and we could win that. So the whole game became, okay, how do we just focus on that one message? And
Yeah.
that hasn't been the whole entire way that we've worked together over the last 2 years, but it was a great way to start, because it was super clear what I knew, where I knew that we could beat other people.
But that's also the point you were making. We were talking about earlier about like your customer is not asking you to be
Their best friend.
well, they're not asking you to come up with like the funniest campaign they've ever had. Like
Yeah.
they just want to make you, you know, your gut healthier
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
whatever thing we're doing. You know, it's like I don't need my brand, I don't need my supplement or my health brand to be doing that. So it is a bit misplaced. And I think it's just it's an eternal question with PR, and I don't think anyone has like a perfect answer for it, because it isn't tangible numerically in the same way that other parts of the business are, and that's always going to be a challenge. I don't think it means that you can't create a clear idea of what value would look like. I just think that we now have a more sophisticated way of understanding what value means to brands. And for example, being in the FT or Bloomberg or whatever publication, it's investors like it. And if you're trying to hire a new CFO, they might see it. You know, that it does certain things that aren't always like tangible. It depends where you're at as a brand. If you're really small and you want to just get people to hit on your website, I don't think PR is the first spend you should do. But there are points at which you, like you say, you know, you have a really good understanding of how PR can work well for you.
And how it's not worked in the past.
And how it's not worked, and you're able to be really directive. And that won't be the same strategy forever. It will iterate and move. Yeah. And it may be that doing a dinner with press is important because you want to create relationships with 10 people who will always write about you. Or when you have a scandal or when you do something, you've got some press mates. But are they necessarily driving sales to the value of that $8,000 dinner? Probably not. In that instance.
But I can say I've never done PR.
Really?
And I'm quite fast because of the way like I came up running a digital marketing conversion agency. So like it was an agency that did e-com and lead gen.
Yeah.
And so in many ways we were pitching against the PR budget. And so just never believed in it. And yet now, and I think the Uber example is such a good one, had someone been more intentional with good PR about them, the financial outcome of that would be huge.
Did you have examples where you had clients who were also investing in PR where you saw
Definitely,
that work together?
Yeah. And so we were very good at being like, oh, you're having this big PR moment.
Yeah.
Let's us try and do like retargeting or try and take that experience from like, you know, online and make it part of the site and whatever. And did very well with it. And so did work with PR agencies. But from a personal perspective, I've never done it. And it's quite cool to hear because, you know, off show, Dan's talked about how great you guys have been so many times.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that the spend for a founder feels like a lot to spend on PR.
Yeah.
And the idea of doing like a dinner and so forth, but the value is so much more than just a single click.
Yeah, totally. Also, I think it's like Dan and I have a good relationship, so he can be like, the team's shit, can you fix this? Do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not offended by that. It's like, I think sometimes PRs, they do like a monthly call and then the founder doesn't turn up and then the marketing person's distracted and then there's not the direction. And like, it's not always that the agency shit or the brand doesn't know what they're doing. It's like, it's a compatibility thing as much as anything else.
I mean, are you comfortable talking about just even recently our conversation? No, and I was
When you
like,
were
we were
wearing
doing the
that
strategy, and I was like, just genuinely, I don't think that the strategy is good.
And I agreed.
Yeah, and I don't think this is good. It's not good enough for us. I don't think it's right.
name
I
names?
do think no. I love the guys,
I'm joking.
but I'm like, no, but I do think you guys are brilliant. So like, I'm only giving you all this feedback because I know that you're much better than this, and like, we wouldn't do the strategy, so it's a no. But it's not like it's a no. I'm going to find another PR agency. It's a no. Let's work together on making this a good agency.
It's just an honest relationship. Like I would say to you, you know, do you have a different jumper for the rest of the things you're filming today so that you could...
I do.
That's what I thought when I came in.
I'm joking.
I do, don't worry.
No, but I think that's my point is like...
I actually was going to say, you're going to wear that for the...
No, I actually love it. I love it.
Yeah, same.
But I also think that, you know, I started when I was 22, which was a long time ago. And I've worked with a range of really brilliant people, loads of really brilliant men, loads of brilliant women, and I don't get offended very easily. I'm not sort of personally bothered if someone gives feedback. I think it's really important to be open to it. And I also run my own company, so I care very, very much about the fact that it is your money or shareholders' money or a combination that you are investing. And I think maybe I have a unique understanding of that because I run my own business, which I own 100% of.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I do give a shit about that.
So the agency business is so hard because you have to be brilliant all the time.
Yeah, you've got to show up with like the best idea you've ever had and
all the time,
sparkle and, you know.
And if you work with brands for a long time, the brand, you know, you can not be brilliant once and they're like, ugh.
Yeah,
You
should
know.
we put it out to tender?
there is one thing-
Like, fuck
Fuck
you.
There is one thing you mentioned that I do think is worth reiterating because it's
You
important.
feel seen.
Well, yeah, I feel seen, but also like I feel that horror, you know,
Yeah.
remembering that.
Yeah.
One thing I think is
Still
important.
in it, so thanks.
One thing I think is important to reiterate, though, to your point of, you know, I don't want to do PR if it's not about heights. It's so important if you're a startup founder of a consumer brand. You know, the James Watt example is really good. He's so tied to that brand. It's like it's all BrewDog or James or BrewDog. I think you really good advice for founders, especially in consumer space, is try to separate yourself out from the brand, and or if you're going to do PR, it has to elevate your brand.
Yeah.
Like there are multiple examples over the last couple of years where you've come to us with amazing PR opportunities for me. And as you said, I turn them down if I can't talk about heights.
Yeah.
And it's not relevant because it doesn't really benefit me. That's my ego getting in the way if I was to say yes, because what is the benefit to my whole team and company? And that my company is who's paying you, not me.
Yeah.
So like it has to feel strategically aligned. And the other example of that most recently is like our Sunday Times business front cover.
Yeah.
You know, when it was like, is this going to be Joel and I on the front cover or Vogue Williams?
Yeah.
And they were like, well, Vogue Williams will get more attention. It will do better. So we're like, we'll choose Vogue Williams.
But that's also not a given, right? Like I've worked with a lot of people and it's ultimately about your intentions. Like you're not trying to be famous through your brand and take all the PR opportunities. You understand that you are a pawn within that we can utilize if it's helpful. But it's, and I think a lot of young founders maybe not young founders, like green founders, are very concerned and interested in the opportunities for them as an individual. And I think that's problematic because it's a personal agenda masquerading as a kind of business goal.
When you're thinking about 2025, what are the most important levers? What are the most important platforms in PR for brands to be thinking about?
Consumers have an expectation that brands have a point of view. I think, everyone's an activist, everyone has an opinion, and it's a really difficult line to tread. But I think people want to be aligned with brands that stand for something. I mean, that's a broad brush. Obviously, if you're buying like bin bags, they're probably not like super concerned about pushing that narrative or having a founder piece. But, certainly for like consumer brands, that's important. I think brands are terrified about cancel culture. I think there's even more fear around the founder. And I think people need to understand the context of that individual as part of a marketing function as opposed to like a personal moment. I think that there's a lot of confusion around which channels to be on and where to spend, and no one necessarily has any more money. They've just got more areas to distribute it. So what I say to clients is, where are your customers, or where are your desired customers? I can't possibly advise you where to be until I know you're targeting women of this age or people doing this or whatever. So I think being really connected to your own data, your own information, and trying to double down in the spaces that those people already are, rather than trying to convince loads of people, feels like an easier win. I think that the influencer space is really hard. I think we're seeing a lot of spend change from face-offs to just people making content. So, not even needing them to post it on their social feeds, but just becoming like almost freelance content creators for brands, which is changing the relationship they have with people who create those assets internally. I think we'll start to see a lot more rebrands. I think there's a lot of dusty brands that aren't resonating. I think that's what we saw with Jaguar, which, by the way, I actually I didn't hate it. People really hated it. People had a lot to say about it. But, they've got to do something at some point. I mean, I think the biggest backlash was they were like, it's virtue signaling. And it's like, is this diversity important to the person buying this car? Perhaps not. So that's why it didn't land. And I think we'll see much more crossover between categories that are growing, but I think we'll see a lot of brands disappear, which I know is not very inspiring, but I think we're seeing it all the time. It's a hard time to start a company, to raise money, to run a business. Good businesses probably will survive, but I think there'll be a lot that go, or that it's not necessarily viable for them to continue.
Well, I saw this trend recently where brands like McDonald's and Tesco were just removing their logos. What's that about?
I think the Heinz just did it this week, where they've put it's got to be beans, or it's got to be this, and I think it's reaffirming the relationship customers have with their core products, that they can almost be brandless because they're so synonymous with those moments. And I would say that one of the things we've talked about, but I talk about quite a lot with clients, is in our desire to connect with our audience, there are some very good examples of where we have seen brands totally own an emotion or a time of day. So Kellogg's is a good one. Like, we only used to eat cereal in the morning. Then it became, we'd come home from work and have a bowl of cereal, or we might have it. Do you remember the Special K diet?
Yeah.
It was just like a woman in a red swimsuit, and it was like, you can look like me if you only eat Special K for 2 weeks. Ridiculous.
Special K is very tasty.
It's so good. But have you Crunchy Nut?
Yeah.
I mean,
better.
absolutely elite.
Yeah.
So I think.
Sorry.
Are you?
Yeah.
He's allergic to everything.
Do you get scared on aeroplanes?
No.
Thank you for your time.
Bravery. Thank you for your service.
No.
Thank you for your.
No.
What
That
else
would be awful.
What else are you allergic to?
Move on.
Eggs, shellfish, nuts, sesame seeds, and honey, and amoxicillin.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, it's rubbish. If someone is wondering, like, how do I make my brand famous?
Yeah.
Like, how should they approach that?
The first question I would say is like, why do you want to be famous? Because people talk about brand fame, but they don't really have a definition of what that is. I think that I think sequencing is one of the most important things in any brand's life, but particularly in relation to PR. You know, when are we actually doing these things? Why, etc., and what our level of comfort is with the fact that they may or may not work. I think also being really thoughtful about whether things exist in a vacuum, and what helps that is having very clear definitions. Like, to your point, this is what we're trying to achieve, and we can get rid of all of this stuff because this is the one thing or the two things that impact that. The thing we haven't talked about is like, you've got to have a great product. Like, you know, you've got to have a great product. It's got to be well designed. People have got to like it. You know, one of our clients is Mark at Surrey, and it's like, if every time we sent that for like a big part of their PR is people testing the product, it's reviews. If every time we sent the product it broke, they wouldn't have good PR. The product is amazing. It is very competitively priced. The colors are brilliant. The way it's merchandised in store is, you know, it deliberately looks like a kind of Apple product. You know, it's sustainable and people do care about that, but they also care about it working. And if it broke every time, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. So the great product, the great packaging, and the very clear point of view and messaging. I actually had it with Huel when I started with Huel. I did 5 years with Huel from when they launched with Julian and James. And at the beginning, it was like, yes, you're very well priced, you're sustainable, there's health benefits, there's convenience benefits. You know, these are all the things that you're doing. But like, no one really cares, you know, 10 years, no one really cares about sustainability. Like, fucking Leonardo DiCaprio is talking about the ocean and people still don't recycle. So we ain't going to win banging that drum. Julian was very concerned with food waste, but it's like, food waste isn't sexy. People aren't writing about a food waste epidemic. People can't see it, so they don't give a shit about it. And then you go, well, you know, then you've got the idea of price, but we don't really want to go hard on price because we don't want to be a student cheap product, you know. So you go through and you work out strategically what is important, what do we want to be important to our customer, how do we want to speak to them, what do we think is going to be a little bit more ownable as a topic, because if a million other people are talking about the same thing, you know, it's really hard to create cut through in these really bloated spaces. I mean, Huel had other challenges because it was like the first product here, not that Soylent was in the US and there was a German brand, I think called Feed, but people think they were first to market because they came out the gate so hard and they were just like, eat complete.
Yeah, and their big win was convenience, right?
Their big win was convenience. And actually, interestingly, their original customer base was out-of-town office workers who didn't have a Pret to go for lunch. And they just wanted to make something easy for lunch and they couldn't be bothered to, you know, make a fucking spag bowl. And then it was people who drove for a living, truckers, taxi drivers, school mums, you know, people who were like needed something in the car and didn't want like a Ginster's pie. Is that a thing?
Yeah.
Perfect. And so there was this evolution, and like, you know, Julian wanted to take on the sandwich. So a big win was being in the meal deal. So it's like the placement followed all of it and it was so considered. And then it's like airports and, you know, gas stations and this. And so it all fit together really seamlessly. But they could have talked about all these other topics. And actually the challenge was not that we were like working out what to say. It was like, which of the things can we really own and land and create storytelling around that lives in all these other places, and having the discipline to say, okay, well, we won't do that. We never targeted the fitness community because we didn't want to be a protein shake. You know, you were challenged with the fact that no, it's not a meal replace. You know, it's a meal alternative. Like all the language stuff. So that was a really interesting learning process for me to be able to. I mean, that was like some of the best work I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, Huel's mega.
Not this stuff,
Not this shit that keeps the lights on.
Yeah.
But with Huel, it was like, I met Julian right at the beginning and he was just like, I don't want to fucking micromanage you. Like, if you say you're going to do some PR, fucking get on with it. And it was great for me because I got loads of autonomy. I got to kind of test and learn. We got on very well. And I was part of this, you know, a very small part of this company that is an enormous success story.
Yeah.
And Julian was never, you know, similar to you, wasn't interested in just like being in a magazine for the sake of it. He was so focused on the quality of the product, and he really cared about creating something that added value for people. And that connection to a great product is an enormous part of why, I mean, he's also like a marketing genius and understood that amongst other things. But the product was amazing. And I think they haven't done any collaborations or partnerships. They haven't done any wild stunts. I also pitched them, well, when he told me he wanted to take on the sandwich and basically get rid of the sandwich, our idea was to buy the town of Sandwich and change its name to Huel. I thought it was quite a good idea. I feel like I've been gaslit my whole career.
Yeah, that is excellent.
So, you know, you just, but they almost haven't, you know, what the fuck do I know? They're like worth hundreds of millions of.
It's true. And on that note, you know nothing. Thank you so much for joining us on Secret Leader.
Thank you so much.